You have probably seen Betty Crocker's red spine cookbook on a shelf. But hidden in its pages are recipes almost lost to time, ones your grandma never taught you and modern cooks rarely remember. In this video, you will unearth 13 forgotten Betty Crocker gems that demand to be tried, before they vanish entirely from memory. Betty Crocker is more than a baking brand, she is America's silent kitchen companion. The official archives and vintage cookbooks list recipes that have slipped out of everyday use, even though many remain perfectly delicious. My goal today is not just to list old recipes, but to resurrect them. I will show you 13 of Betty's lost or nearly forgotten recipes, tell their backstories, and show you why they deserve a place on your table today. Before air fryers, before microwave dinners, there was a red-spined cookbook that lived in nearly every American kitchen. Its pages carry not just recipes, but memories, the hum of Sunday mornings, the scent of cinnamon and butter, and the warmth of family gathered around a modest table. That cookbook was Betty Crocker's Picture Cookbook, a post-war Bible of American home cooking. Yet what most people do not know is that buried inside those pages are recipes that almost vanished, dishes that defined generations but quietly disappeared as food trends changed. It begins with the simplest of ingredients, eggs, butter, milk, and bread, but what they created once meant comfort for an entire generation. Long before instant breakfasts and drive-through coffee, families in 1940s America would gather around the kitchen table for a humble yet elegant dish called eggs à la goldenrod. This was not just breakfast. It was a quiet act of love after years of war rationing. Housewives opened their Betty Crocker cookbook and followed a recipe that transformed the ordinary into the extraordinary. Hard-boiled eggs were carefully separated. The whites were diced and folded into a creamy white sauce made with butter and flour, simmered gently over low heat. Then the sauce was poured over golden toast, and the crumbled yolks were sprinkled on top, glowing like sunlight on snow. Betty Crocker called it a breakfast fit for guests, yet simple enough for every day. It was warm, inexpensive, and filled with meaning. Each bite carried the aroma of post-war hope, a taste of calm in uncertain times. But the story of eggs à la goldenrod is more than nostalgia. It reflects the values that define mid-century cooking: resourcefulness, gratitude, and family. It turned ration leftovers into elegance. It taught that beauty could exist even in simplicity. So why did America forget it? Because progress moved too fast. Convenience replaced care, and the ritual of a slow morning faded into the noise of alarm clocks and traffic. Yet, in old cookbooks, the recipe remains, waiting for someone curious enough to rediscover it. If you have never tasted the golden warmth of this dish, imagine the moment you do: quiet, comforting, and unmistakably vintage. Now, let us turn the page to another lost treasure from Betty Crocker's forgotten kitchen. As America entered the 1950s, something began to change in the nation's kitchens. The war was over, prosperity was rising, and women who had worked in factories were returning home with a new sense of independence. Baking became not only nourishment but also creativity, self-expression, and pride. And in that golden decade of home baking, one dessert stood out in Betty Crocker's cookbooks: the Lazy Daisy cake. The name might sound simple, even playful, but this cake was a quiet revolution. Imagine a moist, airy sponge, baked until light as a cloud, then crowned with a warm coconut and brown sugar topping broiled to a bubbling glaze. It looked rustic yet tasted indulgent, the perfect symbol of post-war optimism. Betty's 1943 edition of the Picture Cookbook called it the cake that welcomes company even when you are tired. Housewives loved it because it required almost no effort: a single bowl, minimal ingredients, and a topping that caramelized in minutes. The lazy part was the secret charm. You could bake it after work, or between chores, and still served something that felt made with care. Children waited eagerly for that sweet, sticky top to harden just enough to crack under a fork. It was the dessert of Saturday evenings, bridge clubs, and church suppers. Every bite carried the taste of butter, vanilla, and the optimism of a simpler America. But like many mid-century treasures, the Lazy Daisy cakes slowly vanished. Packaged mixes took its place, and homemade desserts lost their ritual. Still, within the faded pages of vintage Betty Crocker cookbooks, its handwritten notes and grease stains remain, a silent reminder that comfort never truly goes out of style. So as you imagine that caramel crust melting on your tongue, prepare for our next rediscovery, a drink from the same era that once surprised guests at breakfast tables across America. While desserts like Lazy Daisy cake delighted the senses, breakfast in mid-century America held surprises that modern palates often overlook. One such marvel was the prune shake, a drink that once graced many Betty Crocker breakfast menus, yet today feels almost mythical. Prunes were not merely dried fruits. They were a staple of health-conscious households. Packed with natural sweetness and fiber, they provided a subtle energy boost for children heading to school and adults beginning their workday. Betty Crocker saw potential in this simple ingredient and transformed it into a creamy, refreshing shake, a beverage that was both practical and indulgent. The original recipe called for stewed prunes blended with milk, sugar, and a dash of vanilla, then whipped until frothy. Some variations suggested a pinch of nutmeg or cinnamon for warmth. Served chilled, the shake balanced richness with nutrition, and it became a signature morning treat for families who wanted flavor without fuss. What is remarkable about the prune shake is not just its taste but its cultural context. During the 1940s and 1950s, Americans were learning to balance indulgence with frugality. Ingredients like prunes, often overlooked, allowed homemakers to craft something sophisticated from modest staples. In many ways, this drink encapsulates Betty Crocker's philosophy: elevate the everyday with creativity, care, and a touch of flair. Yet, like many forgotten recipes, the prune shake faded from memory. New cereals, orange juice, and commercial beverages replaced it, and generations grew up unaware that something as simple as blended prunes could be luxurious, comforting, and surprisingly delicious. As you imagine the velvety swirl of prunes in milk, it is easy to understand why this drink was a conversation starter at breakfast tables and a favorite of children who learned to appreciate subtle sweetness. After the subtle sweetness of the prune shake, it is time to return to the realm of baked wonders with a recipe that exudes elegance: the golden egg sponge cake. This cake is not just a dessert, it is a statement of mid-century baking mastery. The golden egg sponge cake relied on a simple yet precise technique. Egg whites were separated and beaten until they formed stiff peaks, while yolks were mixed with sugar and flour to create a light, airy batter. The two were folded together gently, preserving the delicate air that gave the sponge its signature lift. Once baked, the cake emerged golden, soft, and almost ethereal, a centerpiece for afternoon tea or celebratory gatherings. Betty Crocker's original instructions emphasized attention to detail, but the reward was worth every careful fold. The cake could be served plain, dusted with powdered sugar, or adorned with fresh fruit, whipped cream, or a thin layer of glaze. Its charm lay in its versatility. From everyday tea time to holiday tables, it was both approachable and impressive. What makes the golden egg sponge cake truly remarkable is the story it carries. During the post-war years, Americans sought both refinement and simplicity in their homes. This cake embodied that balance, luxurious in texture, humble in ingredients. For generations, it represented the perfect way to honor guests, mark special occasions, or simply indulge in a quiet moment of culinary pride. Yet, as convenience foods and box mixes became dominant in the 1960s, this elegant sponge slowly disappeared from kitchens. Few modern bakers even recognize the technique, and many forget the pleasure of a cake that rises on technique rather than chemical leaveners. As the golden crumb melts on the tongue, it becomes clear why this recipe deserves revival. It is more than a cake, it is a lesson in patience, precision, and the artistry of everyday baking. Next, we will uncover a recipe that takes sweet innovation in a completely unexpected direction. From the airy elegance of the golden egg sponge cake, we now enter the playful, almost theatrical world of chiffon fruit mold, a dessert that embodies the experimental spirit of mid-century American kitchens. Chiffon fruit mold combined gelatin, whipped cream, and fresh or canned fruits to create a dessert that was as visually striking as it was flavorful. Betty Crocker encouraged homemakers to explore color, texture, and form. The mold could be layered with alternating colors, fruits suspended in clear gelatin, or topped with a delicate whipped cream swirl. It was an edible sculpture, a centerpiece, and a sweet conversation starter all at once. In the 1950s and early 1960s, gelatin-based desserts were a hallmark of sophistication and ingenuity. Housewives embraced them because they allowed for creativity without demanding advanced skills. The chiffon fruit mold was particularly popular during holiday meals, bridge club gatherings, and summer picnics, where its vibrant layers would catch the light and draw attention. Children marveled at the suspended fruit, while adults appreciated the balance of flavors and textures. What makes this recipe significant is not just its taste or appearance, but what it represents culturally. In a period defined by optimism and post-war innovation, homemakers were experimenting with new ingredients like whipped cream stabilizers, flavored gelatin, and canned fruits. The chiffon fruit mold became a symbol of resourcefulness, artistry, and pride in the home. Yet, as packaged desserts and instant puddings became widely available, this labor of love treat slipped into obscurity. Few today know the joy of unmolding a perfectly set chiffon dessert, or the satisfaction of layering colors and textures to create a delicate edible masterpiece. The chiffon fruit mold reminds us that forgotten recipes carry lessons in patience, creativity, and presentation, skills that modern convenience foods rarely teach. As we move from playful gelatin creations, the next recipe brings a sense of elegance and ceremony to the table: the strawberry glacé ring. This dessert was a true showstopper in mid-century homes, combining flavor, visual appeal, and a touch of sophistication that few modern recipes replicate. The strawberry glacé ring consisted of a delicate sponge cake formed into a circular mold, soaked lightly with syrup, and layered with a strawberry glaze that shimmered under the dining room lights. Fresh or canned strawberries were often incorporated into the glaze, offering bursts of tart sweetness alongside the soft, airy cake. The ring could be garnished with whipped cream rosettes or candied fruits, creating a dessert that was both festive and refined. Betty Crocker's recipe emphasized careful preparation and presentation. It was intended for special occasions, Sunday dinners, birthdays, or gatherings where the host wanted to impress without appearing overly fussy. The strawberry glacé ring demanded patience, but its result rewarded both the maker and the guests, embodying the mid-century ethos of baking as both craft and hospitality. What makes this recipe remarkable is the story it carries. In a time when convenience was beginning to reshape kitchens, the strawberry glacé ring demonstrated that effort and creativity could elevate even a simple fruit dessert into something extraordinary. Children marveled at its color and shine, while adults admired the balance of sweetness and texture. It was a dessert designed to create memories, not just satiate hunger. Yet, like many of Betty Crocker's creations, it eventually faded from memory. Packaged desserts and boxed cakes became the default, leaving behind only the faint traces of strawberry-scented nostalgia in old cookbooks. The strawberry glacé ring reminds us that dessert is not merely about taste, it is about artistry, presentation, and the joy of creating something beautiful with your own hands. From the elegance of the strawberry glacé ring, we return to a humble, comforting dish that once graced many American breakfast tables: creamed eggs on toast. While it may sound simple, this recipe exemplifies the ingenuity and care embedded in Betty Crocker's mid-century kitchen. The concept is straightforward: tender, hard-cooked eggs nestled in a creamy white sauce, served over crisp, buttery toast. Yet the execution transforms everyday ingredients into something extraordinary. Betty Crocker's original version added subtle seasonings: a pinch of nutmeg, a dash of paprika, elevating the flavor without overwhelming it. The sauce was rich but delicate, balancing the egg's texture with smoothness that melted on the tongue. In post-war kitchens, dishes like this held deep significance. Families were emerging from an era of rationing, and ingredients that were once scarce had returned. Creamed eggs on toast allowed homemakers to create a nourishing, affordable, and comforting meal without sacrificing elegance or presentation. It was a breakfast that could satisfy children, impress visiting friends, and provide a sense of stability in a rapidly changing world. What makes this recipe enduring, yet forgotten, is its simplicity. Modern cooking often emphasizes speed or spectacle, leaving little room for slow, thoughtful preparation. In contrast, creamed eggs on toast demanded attention, patience, and care, the very qualities that made mid-century meals memorable. Although largely absent from contemporary tables, this dish continues to offer lessons in both flavor and tradition. It reminds us that luxury can exist in restraint, and that the most satisfying meals often emerge from modest, well-prepared ingredients. As we savor this vision of comfort food, the next recipe takes us into the realm of salads, not ordinary ones, but those that combine innovation, presentation, and a dash of mid-century flair that modern cooks rarely attempt. From the comforting simplicity of creamed eggs on toast, we move to a dish that transformed an everyday side into a centerpiece: potato salad with French dressing twist. While potato salad is a staple of American kitchens, Betty Crocker's mid-century variation elevated it in both flavor and presentation. This recipe took tender, boiled potatoes and combined them with a tangy French dressing, rather than the usual mayonnaise-based mixture. The dressing, a balance of vinegar, oil, mustard, and seasonings, infused the potatoes with a zesty brightness. Celery, green onions, and sometimes diced bell peppers added crunch, color, and freshness, while hard-boiled eggs provided richness and visual appeal. The result was a salad that was not just a side dish but a conversation starter at picnics, potlucks, and Sunday dinners. In the context of the 1940s and 1950s, this twist on a familiar dish demonstrated ingenuity. Homemakers were eager to explore new flavors without complicating their routines, and the French dressing potato salad allowed for both creativity and practicality. It became a bridge between tradition and modern culinary experimentation, offering families a taste that was both familiar and exciting. What makes this recipe noteworthy is its visual and sensory appeal. The golden yolks, vibrant vegetables, and glossy dressing created a dish that was as inviting to the eyes as it was to the palate. It reflects Betty Crocker's philosophy: elevates simple ingredients with thoughtful preparation, color, and flavor balance. Despite its brilliance, the French dressing potato salad has largely vanished from contemporary cookbooks. Packaged dressings and mass-produced salads replaced it, leaving only nostalgic recollections in family recipe boxes. Yet for those willing to revisit vintage cookbooks, it remains a treasure, a reminder that a little creativity can transform the ordinary into something memorable. From the tangy sophistication of potato salad with French dressing twist, we move to a dessert that was both surprising and indulgent: pineapple cheese loaf. At first glance, It might sound unusual, even daring for mid-century America. Yet in Betty Crocker's cookbooks, this loaf was celebrated for its rich, creamy texture and sweet tart balance. The recipe combined a soft, moist cake base with a layer of cream cheese, creating a luscious interior. Pineapple, often crushed and lightly sweetened, was folded in to introduce bursts of tangy freshness. Some versions suggested a sprinkling of chopped nuts on top for texture and added flavor. The result was a dessert that could be sliced elegantly, served at tea time, or presented at holiday dinners as a centerpiece. The pineapple cheese loaf exemplifies the era's adventurous yet practical approach to baking. Post-war American kitchens were experimenting with flavor combinations that balanced richness, novelty, and affordability. Homemakers embraced recipes that allowed them to impress guests without relying on expensive ingredients or complicated techniques. Betty Crocker's guidance ensured that even a first-time baker could produce a loaf that looked professional and tasted extraordinary. What makes this recipe remarkable is how it merges familiarity with surprise. Pineapple was widely available in cans, cream cheese was affordable, and yet combining them into a loaf created a dessert that felt exotic, festive, and luxurious, all in one. Yet, like many of Betty Crocker's creations, it slowly faded from everyday kitchens. Modern dessert trends favored simpler, faster recipes, leaving behind this treasure of flavor and texture. For those willing to revisit vintage cookbooks, the pineapple cheese loaf is more than a dessert. It is a glimpse into a culinary era where creativity and care transformed even modest ingredients into unforgettable experiences. After the tropical richness of pineapple cheese loaf, we turn to a dessert that is light, airy, and surprisingly sophisticated, lime whip. This mid-century creation combined the tangy brightness of lime with a delicate texture, making it a favorite for summer gatherings, holiday dinners, and any occasion that called for a refreshing finish. Lime whip was deceptively simple yet required careful preparation. Sweetened lime juice was folded into whipped cream, sometimes stabilized with gelatin to ensure the mixture held its airy structure. The result was a dessert that was both fluffy and tart, a delicate balance that delighted the palate without overwhelming it. Some homemakers added a sprinkle of zest on top or paired the whip with a crisp cookie or graham cracker base, enhancing both flavor and presentation. In the context of 1950s kitchens, lime whip reflected the era's fascination with innovation in desserts. Post-war households were exploring new ingredients, flavors, and textures. Citrus fruits, particularly limes, offered a punch of brightness that contrasted with the heavier, cream-laden desserts of the time. Betty Crocker's recipes guided homemakers to achieve elegance without complexity, ensuring even novice bakers could present a dish that impressed both visually and gastronomically. What makes lime whip extraordinary is how it demonstrates the creativity and resourcefulness of mid-century American cooking. Simple ingredients transformed into a sophisticated treat, capturing the joy of experimentation while remaining approachable. Families who served it remembered the refreshing tang, the airy texture, and the subtle artistry that went into its creation. Yet, like many of Betty Crocker's treasures, lime whip disappeared from popular memory. Instant desserts and prepackaged puddings replaced it, leaving only vintage cookbooks as a window into this culinary innovation. Rediscovering it today reminds us that even modest ingredients. From the light and airy lime whip, we enter the world of layered frozen desserts with frozen dessert salad, often referred to as ambrosia in mid-century cookbooks. This dish was more than a dessert. It was a centerpiece of holiday tables, potlucks, and celebratory gatherings, a symbol of creativity and festivity. The recipe combined whipped cream or a creamy gelatin base with an array of ingredients, canned fruits, marshmallows, and sometimes shredded coconut. Cherries or pineapple added color, texture, and sweetness, creating layers that were visually striking as well as flavorful. Often chilled overnight, the salad would set into a firm yet airy consistency, making it both refreshing and indulgent. Betty Crocker included this recipe to inspire homemakers to explore the potential of frozen desserts, which were becoming increasingly popular with the rise of domestic refrigeration. The combination of accessible ingredients allowed families to create something impressive without relying on expensive or rare components. The frozen dessert salad exemplified post-war optimism, abundance, color, and creativity in one dish. What makes this recipe memorable is how it balanced indulgence and practicality. Children loved the sweetness and playfulness of the layered fruits and marshmallows, while adults appreciated the elegance and simplicity of its preparation. It demonstrated that a frozen dessert could be both fun and refined, a concept that modern convenience foods often overlook. Yet, like many mid-century recipes, it faded from regular use as ready-made desserts and instant puddings became widespread. Its charm, however, remains intact in old Betty Crocker cookbooks, waiting for curious cooks to rediscover it. The frozen dessert salad reminds us that even ordinary ingredients, whipped cream, fruit, and gelatin, can be transformed into a dish that delights, surprises, and creates memories. As we approach the final two treasures from Betty Crocker's forgotten kitchen, we return to savory dishes that transformed everyday dinners into memorable meals. First is Wednesday pepper steak, a mid-century comfort dish that combined tender beef with a rich, peppered sauce. This was not simply a weekday meal, it was an expression of resourcefulness and flavor mastery. The beef was slow-cooked until perfectly tender, then paired with a brown gravy infused with onions and freshly ground black pepper. Served over mashed potatoes or buttered noodles, it provided warmth, satisfaction, and a sense of ritual in family dining. Its simplicity belied its elegance, teaching home cooks that care and seasoning could elevate the humblest ingredients. Finally, we arrive at pineapple glazed ham, a recipe that epitomized the festive creativity of the 1950s and 1960s. The ham was coated with a sweet, tangy pineapple glaze and baked until caramelized, the surface glistening with golden perfection. Slices were tender and infused with subtle citrus notes, a dish that captured the attention of both guests and family alike. It was often the centerpiece of holiday dinners, Sunday feasts, or special occasions, representing abundance, celebration, and culinary pride. What ties these last two recipes together is their ability to transform ordinary proteins into extraordinary meals. Betty Crocker's guidance emphasized flavor, technique, and presentation, proving that simple home ingredients could achieve restaurant-quality results. Both dishes vanished from modern cookbooks as convenience foods rose in popularity, yet their legacy remains, a testament to creativity, care, and the artistry of mid-century American cooking. Rediscovering these recipes is not just an act of nostalgia. It is an invitation to experience the tastes, textures, and traditions that shaped American kitchens, flavors that, with a little attention, can be enjoyed anew today. Wow! That was a journey through 13 forgotten Betty Crocker recipes, each with its own story, flavor, and charm. I hope you felt the nostalgia as much as I did while rediscovering these mid-century treasures. Now I want to hear from you. From where are you watching this video? And what is your age? Out of all these recipes, which one have you tried before, if any? Comment below and share your experience. I would love to know which dishes brought back memories or inspired you to try them. Also, I am planning my next video, and I want your ideas to shape it. Drop your suggestions in the comments, any vintage recipes, nostalgic foods, or forgotten dishes you want to see revived. I promise, I read every single comment, and your ideas will help me create videos that you actually want to watch. So do not be shy, tell me your favorites, share your memories, and let's make this a community where we explore the lost flavors of America together. And if you enjoyed this video, make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss a trip back into the kitchens of the past. Thank you for watching, thank you for sharing, and I cannot wait to bring your suggestions to life in the next video.